You're in the middle of a conversation, trying to explain something simple, and suddenly your voice shakes. Your eyes blur. Tears arrive before you can stop. The room changes. People look away or grow quiet, and you feel exposed, almost embarrassed by how quickly your emotions spill over. I've always felt that sting of wondering why some feelings sit so close to the surface. In a world that praises control, crying easily can feel like a personal failure. Yet psychology offers a gentler lens. As Carl Rogers wrote in On Becoming a Person, the curious paradox is that when I accept myself just as I am, then I can change. If tears are not a flaw but a message, what are they trying to tell us about sensitivity, strength, and the way we experience the world? Some people don't cry because they are weak. They cry because their nervous system is tuned differently. You see it in small moments, a song in a supermarket that suddenly pulls at your chest, a stranger's story that lingers long after the conversation ends, a child's disappointment that feels almost physical in your own body. These reactions are not random accidents. They are shaped by temperament, by early experiences, and by the way the brain processes emotional signals. Psychologist Elaine Aron describes this kind of sensitivity as a natural variation in human temperament. In The Highly Sensitive Person, she writes, "Being highly sensitive is a normal, healthy trait. For some people, emotional stimuli travel a shorter distance between perception and feeling. Their brains register nuance quickly and deeply. This can mean richer empathy and awareness, but it also means tears can surface before the mind has time to organize them into words. In everyday life, this might look like crying during a heartfelt speech at a wedding, or tearing up after a difficult conversation with a friend. The emotion is not exaggerated, it is immediate. Understanding this biological and psychological foundation softens the harsh self-judgment many sensitive people carry. It reframes crying as a feature of how they are built, not a defect to be fixed. And once we see tears as part of the body's design, the question shifts from "why do I cry?" to "what are these tears doing for me?" That question opens the door to seeing crying not just as a trait, but as an active process of emotional regulation. Tears often arrive when emotions reach a level that words alone cannot contain. After a long day of holding everything together, a small frustration, a missed bus, a careless comment, can unlock a flood of feeling. In those moments, crying is less about the trigger and more about release. It is the body's way of lowering emotional pressure and restoring balance. Psychologist William James, in The Principles of Psychology, observed that we feel sorry because we cry. His insight suggests that emotional expression and emotional experience are intertwined. When people who cry easily allow tears to move through them, they are not losing control, they are participating in a built-in regulatory cycle. The nervous system shifts, breathing deepens, and tension gradually eases. You can see this after an honest cry in private. The mind feels clearer. Problems that seemed unbearable soften at the edges. In everyday situations, after an argument with a partner or the quiet grief of remembering someone you miss, crying can function like a reset button. It processes feelings that might otherwise stay trapped and heavy. For those who cry easily, this system is especially active. The challenge is not that they cry, but that they often fear what crying says about them. Learning to view tears as meaningful signals, rather than embarrassing interruptions, changes how they respond to their own emotions. And once crying is recognized as a language the body uses to speak, it invites a deeper exploration of how that language is received in the social world. When tears appear in public, they rarely stay private. A meeting pauses. A table grows quiet. Someone offers a tissue. Another person looks uncomfortable, and you become sharply aware of being seen. In a culture that quietly rewards composure and speed, visible emotion can feel like breaking an unspoken rule. Many people who cry easily learn to brace themselves in advance, holding their breath during difficult conversations, clenching their jaw in crowded rooms, not because they don't feel, but because they fear the social cost of showing it. Sociologist and psychologist Ali Russell Hochschild describes this tension in The Managed Heart, writing, "We try to induce or inhibit feeling in order to sustain the outward countenance that produces the proper state of mind in others." In everyday life, this emotional management shows up everywhere: smiling politely when hurt, laughing off a comment that stings, swallowing tears to appear professional. For someone whose emotions rise quickly, This constant self-monitoring can be exhausting. Over time, the pressure to perform emotional control can create a quiet split inside. One part of the person feels deeply, another part stands guard, judging every reaction. This inner surveillance often leads to shame, not because crying is harmful, but because it violates a social script about strength. Yet when tears are always pushed back, the emotional system loses one of its natural outlets, and feelings tend to resurface in other ways. Recognizing the social meaning attached to tears helps sensitive individuals see that much of their discomfort is learned, not inherent. It invites a gentler negotiation between authenticity and context, a search for ways to honor emotion without feeling erased by it. And that search naturally leads to a more deliberate skill, learning to understand what tears are actually saying. Crying easily becomes less confusing when you begin to treat tears as information. Not all tears carry the same message. Some come from sadness, others from relief, empathy, frustration, or even joy. In everyday moments, tearing up while watching a friend succeed, or feeling your eyes sting during a difficult apology, the body is signaling something specific about what matters to you. Psychologist Daniel Goleman, in Emotional Intelligence, writes, "If your emotional abilities aren't in hand, no matter how smart you are not going to get very far." Emotional intelligence starts with noticing and naming what you feel. For people who cry easily, this skill is especially powerful. Instead of labeling themselves as too sensitive, they can ask simple, grounding questions. What exactly am I feeling right now? What value or fear is being touched? In practice, this might mean pausing after tears to reflect rather than criticize. A person who cries during a tense discussion at work might discover that the tears come from feeling unheard, not from weakness. Another who tears up at a small kindness may recognize a deep hunger for connection. Each insight adds clarity. Tears shift from being disruptive events to becoming guides that point toward unmet needs and core priorities. As this interpretive skill grows, emotional reactions start to feel less like storms and more like signals on a map. Sensitive individuals gain a sense of agency. They can respond to their feelings instead of being swept away by them. And as they learn to read their own emotional landscape more fluently, they begin to notice how closely their tears are linked to their capacity to feel with others. That growing awareness often reveals something surprising. Many people who cry easily are not only reacting to their own feelings, but also absorbing the emotional currents around them. You see it when a friend shares a quiet disappointment, and your eyes fill before theirs do, or when a stranger's story on the news lingers in your chest long after the screen goes dark. This is empathy operating at high resolution, a nervous system that registers other people's emotions almost as if they were your own. Psychologist Carl Rogers, in A Way of Being, wrote, "When someone really hears you without passing judgment on you, it feels damn good." People who are emotionally sensitive often offer this kind of listening naturally. Their tears can be a sign of deep attunement, a visible trace of their ability to resonate with another person's inner world. In everyday relationships, this can make them trusted confidants, the friend others call late at night, the partner who senses unspoken tension in a room. But empathy at this depth is not only a gift to others, it also shapes identity. Feeling with people creates a strong sense of connection and meaning. Sensitive individuals often report that their tears remind them what they care about and whom they love. Yet this same openness can blur boundaries, making it hard to separate one's own emotions from those of others. As empathy expands, it raises an important question about sustainability. How do you stay open without becoming overwhelmed by everything you feel? There are days when the emotional volume simply feels too loud. A crowded commute, a tense workplace, a stream of troubling headlines. Each impression adds another layer of feeling. For someone who cries easily, this accumulation can tip into overload. Tears arrive not from a single event, but from the weight of many small inputs pressing at once. Psychiatrist Judith Herman, in Trauma and Recovery, observed that the conflict between the will to deny horrible events and the will to proclaim them aloud is the central dialectic of psychological trauma. Even outside of trauma, a similar tension appears in everyday emotional life, the push to stay open versus the need to protect oneself. Without some form of boundary, constant exposure to intense feeling can lead to exhaustion and withdrawal. Healthy boundaries are not emotional walls, they are filters. In practical terms, this might mean limiting how much distressing media you consume, stepping outside for a few quiet minutes after a charged conversation, or gently telling a friend you need time to process before continuing. These small acts teach the nervous system that openness and safety can coexist. For people who cry easily, learning to modulate emotional input does not dull their sensitivity. Instead, it preserves it. By creating spaces of rest and separation, they make it possible to return to others with renewed clarity and compassion. And as they practice this balance between openness and protection, they begin to weave their sensitivity into a more stable understanding of who they are. Over time, the question stops being how to stop crying and becomes how to live with sensitivity without fighting it. Many people who cry easily spend years trying to edit themselves, rehearsing neutral expressions, apologizing for tears, promising to be less emotional next time. But real integration begins when sensitivity is no longer treated as a glitch in personality, but as a thread woven into identity. Psychologist Abraham Maslow wrote in Motivation and Personality, "What a man can be, he must be." There is a quiet relief in recognizing that your emotional depth is not an obstacle to overcome, but a dimension of who you are meant to become. In everyday life, this integration shows up in small acts of honesty, telling a trusted friend, "I cry when I'm overwhelmed," or allowing yourself to step away and feel instead of pretending nothing happened. As sensitivity is accepted, it becomes easier to pair it with strength. A person can cry during a difficult conversation and still speak clearly about their needs. They can feel deeply moved by another's pain without losing their own center. Tears stop being interruptions and start becoming part of a larger rhythm: emotion, reflection, response. This coherent sense of self does not erase vulnerability. It holds it alongside resilience. And in that balance, the original tension between weakness and strength begins to soften, preparing the ground for a final rethinking of what tears have meant all along. At the beginning, tears felt like a betrayal, evidence of being too exposed in a world that rewards control. But seen through the lens of psychology, crying easily reveals a nervous system built for depth, empathy, and connection. Sensitivity is not the opposite of resilience, it is one of its raw materials. When tears are understood as signals rather than flaws, they become guides. They point toward what matters, where boundaries are needed, and how closely we are tied to others. Accepting this does not make life easier in every moment. Public discomfort may still sting. Embarrassment may still flicker, but beneath those reactions grows a steadier knowledge. Feeling deeply is a form of engagement with life, not a failure to master it. The journey is less about hardening yourself, and more about learning the shape of your own emotional landscape. In that learning, tears lose their power to shame and gain the power to inform. What once felt like weakness begins to look like a quiet, persistent strength, the courage to remain open, responsive, and fully human.